Your first chapter is the most important chapter in your book, and so it's really important that you get that one right. I read a lot of first chapters and start a lot of books that don't grab me or hook me from the beginning, and so in this video, I'm going to share the 5 most common mistakes I see in first chapters. By the end of this video, you will have a better idea of what to avoid when penning the first chapter of your novel and what you need to do in order to grab readers from page 1 and have them tear through the rest of your story. But before we get started, hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Claire Fraze, and I am an award-winning young adult author who makes videos on this channel sharing actionable writing tips that helped me make my own writing better. I am the author of the young adult supernatural thriller They Stay series, including books They Stay, They Whisper, They Return, and I am currently working on book 4. I read a lot of young adult books, and I have a pretty short attention span, and so it's hard to really hook me into a first chapter, and these are the things that if I personally read them in a book, would probably make it harder for me to keep going on that book or will make me lose interest. I am not an all-knowing expert on this topic. I am only speaking from my own personal opinions and experiences, so take what I say that you like, ignore what I say that you don't like, and let's get into the video. The first mistake I see in a lot of first chapters is not being smart about your point of entry. A point of entry is the very first moment in your novel. It's the first thing you show your reader when they open the book. It's the first moment that pulls them into the story, that introduces them to the characters and the conflict, and you have to design it in order for it to hook them as fast as possible. If you're writing a murder mystery, your story is going to be way more interesting if your point of entry happens when your character finds the body than it is when your character wakes up in the morning. You need to be targeted about what your point of entry is and choose or craft one that is the most unique and interesting to your reader, which makes them want to find out more. Your point of entry doesn't need to be the moment that your character finds the body, but if they're going to find a dead body by the end of the chapter, you want your point of entry to have something to do with that investigation, or have your sentence be like, you know, she didn't expect to find a body that day, or of all the places to find a body in a dumpster behind her house was not where she was expecting, or something hinting at something darker to come. Like in the first book in my series, They Stay, the first line is, "If Max doesn't put his shirt on right now, I'm gonna kill him." I wanted to work the word kill into that first sentence to immediately show what kind of book this is gonna be, because it's a thriller and mystery, and that little boy goes missing by the end of the first chapter. So I wanted to have both Max, the boy, and the word kill in the same sentence, and even though she means it as not actually killing him, she's just trying to get him dressed for t-ball practice, having those two words together created a more ominous first sentence that I wanted to have to pull readers in. Book 3 of the series deals a lot with people coming back from the dead and corpses being reanimated, and so the first line of that book is, "Coming to the hospital was supposed to make me feel better, but I feel like a corpse." Choosing the right moment to bring readers into the story is really important, because if they get bored by the first sentence, they're probably not going to stick around and finish your first chapter, let alone your whole book. Which leads me to the second mistake that I read a lot in first chapters, which is not getting right to the point. Because let's be honest, there are important things to know about your main character that need to be established in this first ordinary world chapter, but there are also things about them that we might not need to know yet. If this is a murder mystery where a teen detective finds a body and spends the rest of the book going and hunting for that body, I want to know whether they have good deductive skills. I want to know whether they are really sharp, why they like looking into true crime and detective stories, and have that motivation established. I want to know a little bit about their relationship with their families, whether their parents are supportive of them going and doing all of this crime solving. But I don't need to know what they ate for breakfast that morning. I don't want to spend a whole chapter, let alone multiple chapters, of their daily routine before they find the body. I want to get to the body as soon as possible and learn all of the stuff I need to know about them in as short amount of time as possible before they get to the body. I understand wanting to paint a clear picture of your character and their life before the inciting incident, but there is a whole novel's length of space that's going to happen where you can incorporate all of these different things about your character. You don't need to do it all in chapter 1. Your goal in chapter 1 is to pull your reader into your story as fast as possible, and then they can learn more about your character and build a closer relationship with them as the story progresses. You just need to get them to that inciting incident and have them learn only the basics about your character that's going to get them to emotionally connect to them and get them to the main conflict. I love reading books where it gets to that inciting incident within the first chapter, or at least within the first 2 chapters. I like getting there as fast as possible and having a full chapter where there isn't a strong hook at the end of the first chapter or a strong cliffhanger or the inciting incident that happens at the end of the first chapter, and it's just a chapter about your character going about their lives and, maybe the bell rings and they go home from school at the end of the first chapter. It's not that interesting to me. By the end of the first chapter, I want to have a good idea of who your character is, what they want, and what this thing is that's going to thrust them into the story. I don't want to just have a character and not have a conflict yet. I want to have that conflict kick off, like having a dead body by the end of the chapter. Or if it's a horror book, noticing something really freaky and weird happening at the end of the first chapter that's not normal. A hint of this broader conflict is going to pull me as a reader into the story a lot faster, and I always feel like it's hard for me to get into stories at the beginning, but once the conflict kicks off and I'm connected to the character, I will tear through that book. But the longer it takes at the beginning, the more likely it is that I'm going to put it down, so that's why when I write, I try to have my inciting incident happen at the end of chapter 1 or as close to it as possible. The 4th mistake is not having a mini climax. When I write, I like to make sure that every single one of my chapters follows the same basic story arc. Every single chapter has a beginning, middle, and end, and they all follow a arc that looks kind of like this. This tracks time on the bottom, so as your character progresses through the story, the beginning is on the left, the ending is on the right, and the line is the amount of tension in the story. So on the bottom, it's not quite as tense, but then the action is at its most intense when it curves up. So your character starts at the beginning where it's not really super active, but then the inciting incident happens and the action rises very quickly up to a big climactic point and there's a resolution. Your whole story should follow a framework like this, but I also believe that every single chapter should too. You should have a conflict in every chapter, you should have a midpoint turn in every chapter, and you should have a climax in every chapter. Even the first chapter should have a mini climax, some point of intensity that propels you into the next chapter. And when it doesn't have that, I don't really feel the need to keep reading fast. The 4th mistake I see first chapters make is introducing too many characters at once. Just start with who you need to know. Just start with the main character who is really important in the story, obviously, and introduce only the people that will make the inciting incident make sense. You can introduce more characters after, but your goal for the first chapter is getting a reader who has never entered the world of your story before to your inciting incident and keeping them interested. You want to get them past all of those initial pages because the initial pages are the easiest ones to close and put away, and in order to do that, you want to keep their focus and keep them focused on the main character. I usually just try to introduce my main character and maybe some of the players that are important in the inciting incident, and then I'll introduce the other characters later after chapter 1. And the 5th and final mistake that I see a lot of first chapters make is not having a cliffhanger or lead into the next chapter. You want your readers to keep going through your story. You want them to be propelled from chapter to chapter, so you need to give them a reason to turn to chapter 2. If you have your inciting incidents kick off at the end of chapter 1, that's going to help because it's going to help push them into chapter 2 because they're going to want to figure out what's going on, why this weird supernatural thing is happening, or what quest they've been called on to take. But if you don't choose to have your inciting incident happen at the end of chapter 1, you still need to have a compelling reason for them to go from chapter 1 to chapter 2. In book 1 of my series, I have my main character's younger brother go missing at the end of chapter 1. In book 2, I have a very creepy brush with the supernatural happen at the end of chapter 1, which pushes them into chapter 2. At the end of book 3, I have a character who people thought was dead show up, very, very much alive, which pushes into chapter 2. I'm super focused on trying to make sure that readers keep moving through the story, and when I'm not given a very compelling cliffhanger, if it's a really good story, I'll still read it, but it's more interesting when I feel like there's a little bit of a cliffhanger every single chapter that makes me want to keep turning the page. These cliffhangers don't have to be intense, but they do have to just be something that puts a little bit of curiosity in the reader and wants to make them find out more. So those are the top 5 mistakes I see first chapters make in the books I'm reading. I hope that was helpful. If it was, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel. As I mentioned at the beginning, my name is Claire Fraze, and I'm an award-winning young adult author who makes videos sharing writing tips that helped me make my own writing better. What is your biggest pet peeve when reading first chapters? Are there things that are turnoffs for you when starting to read a first chapter? If so, let me know down in the comments. I would love to hear from you, and I'm sure the other people in this community would too. I hope you have a fantastic week, everybody, and as always, happy writing.